Disc 4.
My intention had been simply to take the vessels round to the harbor in Safety Bay, but the calm sea and fine weather tempted me to make another trip to the wreck. It took up more time than I expected, so that when on board we could only make a further examination of the cargo, collect a few portable articles, and then avail ourselves of the sea breeze which would fail us later in the evening. To Jack, the pleasure of hunting about in the hold was novel and charming, and very soon a tremendous rattling and clattering heralded his approach with a wheelbarrow. In the highest spirits at his good fortune in having found such a capital thing in which to bring home potatoes. He was followed by Fritz, whose news was still more important. He had found, carefully packed and enclosed within partitions, what appeared to be the separate parts of a pinnace, with rigging and fittings complete, even to a couple of small brass guns. This was a great discovery, and I hastened to see if the lad was right. Indeed he was. But my pleasure was qualified by a sense of the arduous task it would be to put such a craft together so as to be fit for sea. For the present, we had barely time to get something to eat and hurry into the boat, where were collected our new acquisitions, namely a copper boiler, iron plates, tobacco graters, 2 grindstones, a small barrel of powder and another of flints, 2 wheelbarrows besides Jack's, which he kept under his own especial care. As we drew near the shore, we were surprised to see a number of little figures ranged in a row along the water's edge, and apparently gazing fixedly at us. They seemed to wear dark coats and white waistcoats, and stood quite still with their arms dropping by their sides. Only every now and then one would extend them gently as though longing to embrace us. Ah, here at last come the pygmy inhabitants of the country to welcome us, cried I, laughing. Oh, father, exclaimed Jack, I hope they are Lilliputians. I once read in a book about them, so there must be such people, you know, only these look rather too large. You must be content to give up the Lilliputians and accept penguins, my dear Jack, said I. We have not before seen them in such numbers, but Ernest knocked one down, if you remember, soon after we landed. They are excellent swimmers, but helpless on land, as they can neither fly nor run. We were gradually approaching the land as I spoke, and no sooner was the water shallow than out sprang Jack from his tub, and wading ashore, took the unsuspecting birds by surprise, and with his stick laid 6 right and left, either stunned or dead at his feet. The rest escaped into the water, dived, and disappeared. As these penguins are disagreeable food, on account of their strong, oily taste, I was sorry Jack had attacked them. But going to examine them when we landed, some of the fallen arose from their swoon, and began solemnly to waddle away, upon which we caught them, and tying their feet together with long grass, laid them on the sand to wait until we were ready to start. The 3 wheelbarrows then each received a load. The live penguins, seated gravely, were trundled along by Jack, and away we went at a great rate. The unusual noise of our approach set the dogs barking furiously, but discovering us, they rushed forward with such forcible demonstrations of delight that poor little Jack, who, as it was, could scarcely manage his barrow, was fairly upset, penguins and all. This was too much for his patience, and it was absurd to see how he started up and cuffed them soundly for their boisterous behavior. This scene and the examination of our burdens caused great merriment, the tobacco grater and iron plates evidently puzzling everybody. I sent the boys to catch some of our geese and ducks, and bid them fasten a penguin to each by the leg, thinking that it was worth while to try to tame them. My wife had exerted herself in our absence to provide a good store of potatoes, and also of manioc root, I admired her industry, and little Franz said, "Ah, father, I wonder what you will say when mother and I give you some Indian corn and melons and pumpkins and cucumbers. Now, you little chatterbox," cried she, "you have let out my secret. I was to have the pleasure of surprising your father when my plants were growing up." "Never mind. I am charmed to hear about it. Only do tell me, where did those seeds come from?" "Out of my magic bag, of course," replied she. "And each time I have gone for potatoes, I have sown seeds in the ground which was dug up to get them, and I have planted potatoes also." "Well done!" I exclaimed. "Why, you are a model of prudence and industry." "But," continued she, "I do not half like the appearance of those tobacco graters you have brought. Is it possible you are going to make snuff? Do, pray, let us make sure of abundance of food for our mouths before we think of our noses." "Make your mind easy, my wife. I have not the remotest intention of introducing the dirty, ridiculous habit of snuffing into your family. Please to treat my graters with respect, however, because they are to be the means of providing you with the first fresh bread you have seen this many a long day." "What possible connection can there be between bread and tobacco graters? I cannot imagine what you mean, and to talk of bread where there are no ovens is only tantalizing." "Ah, you must not expect real loaves," said I. "But on these flat iron plates I can bake flat cakes or scones, which will be excellent bread. I mean to try at once what I can do with Ernest's roots. And first of all, I want you to make me a nice, strong canvas bag." This my wife willingly undertook to do, but she evidently had not much faith in my powers as a baker, and I saw her set on a good potful of potatoes before beginning to work, as though to make sure of a meal without depending on my bread. Spreading a large sailcloth on the ground, I summoned my boys and set to work. Each took a grater and a supply of well-washed manioc root, and when all were seated round the cloth, "Once, twice, thrice, off!" cried I, beginning to rub a root as hard as I could against the rough surface of my grater. My example was instantly followed by the whole party, amid bursts of merriment, as each remarked the funny attitude and odd gestures of his neighbors, while vehemently rubbing, rasping, grating, and grinding down the roots allotted to him. No one was tempted by the look of the flour to stop and taste it, for in truth it looked much like wet sawdust. Our supply of roots being soon reduced to damp powder, the canvas bag was filled with it, and tying it tightly up, I attempted to squeeze it, but soon found that mechanical aid was necessary in order to express the moisture. My arrangements for this purpose were as follows. A strong, straight beam was made flat on one side. Smooth planks were laid across two of the lower roots of our tree. On these we placed the sack. Above the sack another plank, and over that the long beam. One end was passed under a root near the sack, the other projected far forward. And to that we attached all the heaviest weights we could think of, such as an anvil, iron bars, and masses of lead. The consequent pressure on the bag was enormous, and the sap flowed from it to the ground. "Will this stuff keep any time?" inquired my wife, who came to see how we were getting on. "Or must all this great bagful be used at once? In that case we shall have to spend the whole of tomorrow in baking cakes." "Not at all," I replied. "Once dry, the flour in barrels will keep fresh a long time. We shall use a great deal of this, however, as you shall see." "Do you think we might begin now, father?" said Fritz. "There does not seem the least moisture remaining." "Certainly," said I. "But I shall only make one cake today for an experiment. We must see how it agrees with Master Nips and the hens before we set up a bakehouse in regular style. I took out a couple of handfuls of flour for this purpose, and with a stick loosened and stirred the remainder, which I intended should again be pressed. While an iron plate placed over a good fire was getting hot, I mixed the meal with water and a little salt, kneaded it well, and forming a thickish cake, laid it on the hot plate, when, one side presently becoming a nice yellow-brown color, it was turned and was quickly baked. It smelt so delicious that the boys quite envied the two hens and the monkey, who were selected as the subjects of this interesting experiment, and they silently watched them gobbling up the bits of cake I gave them. We left the fowls picking up the least crumb they could find of the questionable food, and assembled to enjoy our evening meal of roast penguin. The potatoes were, as usual, excellent. The penguin really not so bad as I expected, although fishy in taste and very tough. Next morning everyone expressed the tenderest concern as to the health of Nips and the hens, and lively pleasure was in every countenance when Jack, who ran first to make the visit of inquiry, brought news of their perfect good health and spirits. No time was now to be lost, and bread-baking commenced in earnest. A large fire was kindled, the plates heated, the meal made into cakes, each of the boys busily preparing his own and watching the baking most eagerly. Mistakes occurred, of course. Some of the bread was burnt, some not done enough. But a pile of nice, tempting cakes was at length ready, and with plenty of good milk, we breakfasted right royally and in high spirits at our success. Soon after, whilst feeding the poultry with the fragments of the repast, I observed that the captive penguins were quite at ease among them, and as tame as the geese and ducks. Their bonds were therefore loosed, and they were left as free as the other fowls. Chapter 6. Having now discovered how to provide bread for my family, my thoughts began to revert to the wreck and all the valuables yet contained within it. Above all, I was bent on acquiring possession of the beautiful pinnace, and aware that our united efforts would be required to do the necessary work, I began to coax and persuade my wife to let me go in force with all the boys except Franz. She very unwillingly gave her consent at last, but not until I had faithfully promised never to pass a night on board. I did so with reluctance, and we parted, neither feeling quite satisfied with the arrangement. The boys were delighted to go in so large a party, and merrily carried provision bags filled with cassava bread and potatoes. Reaching Safety Bay without adventure, we first paid a visit to the geese and ducks which inhabited the marsh there, and having fed them and seen they were thriving well, we buckled on each his cork-belt, stepped into the tub-boat, and with the raft in tow, steered straight for the wreck. When we got on board, I desired the boys to collect whatever came first to hand, and load the raft to be ready for our return at night, and then we made a minute inspection of the pinnace. I came to the conclusion that difficulties, well nigh insuperable, lay between me and the safe possession of the beautiful little vessel. She lay in a most unget-at-able position at the further end of the hold, stowed in so confined and narrow a space that it was impossible to think of fitting the parts together there. At the same time, these parts were so heavy that removing them to a convenient place piece by piece was equally out of the question. I sent the boys away to amuse themselves by rummaging out anything they liked to carry away, and sat down quietly to consider the matter. As my eyes became used to the dim light which entered the compartment through a chink or crevice here and there, I perceived how carefully every part of the pinnace was arranged and marked with numbers, so that if only I could bestow sufficient time on the work and contrive space in which to execute it, I might reasonably hope for success. Room! "Room to work in, boys! That's what we need in the first place," I cried, as my sons came to see what plan I had devised, for so great was their reliance on me that they never doubted the pinnace was to be ours. "Fetch axes, and let us break down the compartment and clear space all round." To work we all went. Yet evening drew near, and but little impression was made on the mass of woodwork around us. We had to acknowledge that an immense amount of labor and perseverance would be required before we could call ourselves the owners of the useful and elegant little craft, which lay within this vast hulk like a fossil shell embedded in a rock. Preparations for returning to shore were hastily made, and we landed without much relish for the long walk to Falconhurst, when, to our great surprise and pleasure, we found my wife and little France at Tentholm awaiting us. She had resolved to take up her quarters there during the time we should be engaged on the wreck. "In that way you will live nearer your work, and I shall not quite lose sight of you," said she with a pleasant smile. "You are a good, sensible, kind wife," I exclaimed, delighted with her plan, "and we shall work with the greater diligence that you may return as soon as possible to your dear Falconhurst." "Come and see what we have brought you, mother," cried Fritz. "A good addition to your stores, is it not?" And he and his 3 brothers exhibited 2 small casks of butter, 3 of flour, corn, rice, and many other useful articles. Our days were now spent in hard work on board, first cutting and clearing an open space round the pinnace, and then putting the parts together. We started early and returned at night, bringing each time a valuable freight from the old vessel. At length, with incredible labor, all was completed. The pinnace stood actually ready to be launched, but imprisoned within massive wooden walls which defied our strength. It seemed exactly as though the graceful vessel had awakened from sleep and was longing to spring into the free blue sea and spread her wings to the breeze. I could not bear to think that our success so far should be followed by failure and disappointment. Yet no possible means of setting her free could I conceive, and I was almost in despair when an idea occurred to me which, if I could carry it out, would effect a release without further labor or delay. Without explaining my purpose, I got a large cast-iron mortar, filled it with gunpowder, secured a block of oak to the top, through which I pierced a hole for the insertion of the match, and this great petard I so placed that when it exploded, it should blow out the side of the vessel, next which the pinnace lay. Then, securing it with chains, that the recoil might do no damage, I told the boys I was going ashore earlier than usual, and calmly desired them to get into the boat. Then, lighting a match I had prepared, and which would burn some time before reaching the powder, I hastened after them with a beating heart, and we made for the land. We brought the raft close inshore and began to unload it. The other boat I did not haul up, but kept her ready to put off at a moment's notice. My anxiety was unobserved by anyone, as I listened with strained nerves for the expected sound. It came! A flash! A mighty roar! A grand burst of smoke! My wife and children, terror-stricken, turned their eyes towards the sea, whence the startling noise came, and then in fear and wonder looked to me for some explanation. "Perhaps," said my wife, as I did not speak, "perhaps you have left a light burning near some of the gunpowder, and an explosion has taken place." "Not at all unlikely," replied I quietly. "We had a fire below when we were caulking the seams of the pinnace. I shall go off at once and see what has happened. Will anyone come?" The boys needed no second invitation, but sprang into the boat, while I lingered to reassure my wife by whispering a few words of explanation. And then joining them, we pulled for the wreck at a more rapid rate than we ever had done before. No alteration had taken place in the side at which we usually boarded her, and we pulled round to the further side, where a marvelous sight awaited us. A huge rent appeared. The decks and bulwarks were torn open. The water was covered with floating wreckage. All seemed in ruins, and the compartment where the pinnace rested was fully revealed to view. There sat the little beauty, to all appearance uninjured, and the boys, whose attention was taken up with the melancholy scene of ruin and confusion around them, were astonished to hear me shout in enthusiastic delight, "Hurrah! She is ours! The lovely pinnace is won! We shall be able to launch her easily after all. Come, boys, let us see if she has suffered from the explosion which has set her free." The boys gazed at me for a moment, and then, guessing my secret, "You planned it yourself, you clever, cunning father! Oh, that machine we helped to make was on purpose to blow it up!" cried they, and eagerly they followed me into the shattered opening, where, to my intense satisfaction, I found everything as I could wish, and the captive in no way a sufferer from the violent measures I had adopted for her deliverance. The boys were deeply interested in examining the effects of the explosion, and in the explanation I gave them of the principal and proper way to manage a petard. It was evident that the launch could now be effected without much trouble. I had been careful to place rollers beneath the keel, so that by means of levers and pulleys we might, with our united strength, move her forward towards the water. A rope was attached by which to regulate the speed of the descent, and then, all hands putting their shoulders to the work, the pinnace began to slide from the stocks, and finally slipped gently and steadily into the water, where she floated as if conscious it was her native element, while we, wild with excitement, cheered and waved enthusiastically. We then only remained long enough to secure our prize carefully at the most sheltered point, and went back to Tentham, where we accounted for the explosion, saying that having blown away one side of the ship, we should be able to obtain the rest of its contents with a very few more days' work. These days were devoted to completing the rigging, the mounting of her 2 little brass guns, and all necessary arrangements about the pinnace. It was wonderful what martial ardor was awakened by the possession of a vessel armed with 2 real guns. The boys chattered incessantly about savages, fleets of canoes, attack, defense, and final annihilation of the invaders. I assured them that, brilliant as their victories would doubtless be, we should have good cause to thank God if their fighting powers and newborn valor were never put to the test. The pinnace was fully equipped and ready to sail, while yet no idea of the surprise we were preparing for her had dawned upon my wife, and I permitted the boys, who had kept the secret so well, to fire a salute when we entered the bay. Casting off from the ship and spreading the sail, our voyage began. The pinnace glided swiftly through the water. I stood at the helm, Ernest and Jack manned the guns, and Fritz gave the word of command. "Fire!" Bang! Bang! Rattled out a thrilling report, which echoed and re-echoed among the cliffs, followed by our shouts and hurrahs. My wife and her little boy rushed hastily forward from near the tent, and we could plainly see their alarm and astonishment, but speedily recognizing us, they waved joyfully and came quickly to the landing place to meet us. By skillful management we brought the pinnace near a projection of the bank, and Fritz assisted his mother to come on board, where, breathless with haste and excitement, she exclaimed, "You dear, horrid, wonderful people! Shall I scold you or praise you? You have frightened me out of my wits. To see a beautiful little ship come sailing in was startling enough, for I could not conceive who might be on board. But the report of your guns made me tremble with fear, and had I not recognized your voices directly after, I should have run away with Franz, heaven knows where. But have you really done all this work yourselves?" she continued, when we had been forgiven for terrifying her with our vainglorious salute. "What a charming little yacht! I should not be afraid to sail in this myself." After the pinnace had been shown off and received the admiration she deserved, while our industry, skill, and perseverance met with boundless praise, "Now," said my wife, "you must come with me and see how little Franz and I have improved our time every day of your absence." We all landed and, with great curiosity, followed my wife up the river towards the cascade, where, to our astonishment, we found a garden neatly laid out in beds and walks. And she continued, "We don't frighten people by firing salutes in honor of our performances, although, by and by, I too shall want fire in a peaceable form. Look at my beds of lettuce and cabbages, my rows of beans and peas. Think what delicious dinners I shall be able to cook for you, and give me credit for my diligence." "My dear wife," I exclaimed, "this is beautiful. You have done wonders. Did you not find the work too hard?" "The ground is light and easy to dig hereabouts," she replied. "I have planted potatoes and cassava roots. There is space for sugar canes and the young fruit trees, and I shall want you to contrive to irrigate them by leading water from the cascades in hollow bamboos. Up by the sheltering rocks, I mean to have pineapples and melons. They will look splendid when they spread there. To shelter the beds of European vegetables from the heat of the sun, I have planted seeds of maize round them. The shadow of the tall plants will afford protection from the burning rays. Do you think that is a good plan?" "I do indeed. The whole arrangement is capital. Now, as sunset approaches, we must return to the tent for supper and rest, for both of which we are all quite ready." Next morning, my wife said, "If you can exist on shore long enough to visit Falconhurst, dear husband, I should like you to attend to the little fruit trees. I fear they have been too much neglected. I have watered them occasionally and spread earth over the roots as they lay, but I could not manage to plant them." "You have done far more than I could have expected, my wife," I replied, "and provided you do not ask me to give up the sea altogether, I most willingly agree to your request, and will go to Falconhurst as soon as the raft is unloaded and everything safely arranged here." Life on shore was an agreeable change for us all, and the boys went actively to work so that the stores were quickly brought up to the tent, piled in order, and carefully covered with sailcloths, fastened down by pegs all round. The pinnace, being provided with an anchor, was properly moored, and her elegant appearance quite altered the look of our harbor, hitherto occupied only by the grotesque tub-boat and flat, uninteresting raft. Taking an ample supply of everything we should require at Falconhurst, we were soon comfortably re-established in that charming abode, its peaceful shade seeming more delightful than ever after the heat and hard work we had lately undergone. Several Sundays had passed during our stay at Tentholm, and the welcome day of rest now returned again, to be observed with heartfelt devotion and grateful praise. In the evening, I desired my boys to let me see the dexterity in athletic exercises, such as running, leaping, wrestling, and climbing, telling them that they must keep up the practice of these things so as to grow strong, active men, powerful to repel and cope with danger, as well as agile and swift-footed to escape from it. "I want to see my sons strong, both morally and physically," said I. "That means, little Franz," as the large blue eyes looked inquiringly up at me, "brave to do what is good and right, and to hate evil, and strong to work, hunt, and provide for themselves and others, and to fight if necessary." On the following day, The boys seeming disposed to carry out my wishes by muscular exercise of all sorts, I encouraged them by saying I meant to prepare a curious new weapon for them, only they must promise not to neglect the practice of archery. As to their guns, I had no reason to fear they would be laid aside. Taking a long cord, I attached a leaden bullet to each end, and had instantly to answer a storm of questions as to what this could possibly be for. "This is a miniature lasso," said I. "The Mexicans, Patagonians, and various tribes of South America make use of this weapon in hunting with marvelous dexterity, only, having no bullets, they fasten stones to their ropes, which are immensely longer than this. One end is swung round and round the mounted hunter's head, and then cast with skill and precision towards the animal he wishes to strike. Immediately drawing it back, he can repeat the blow, and either kill or wound his prey. Frequently, however, the intention is to take the animal, wild horse or buffalo or whatever it may be, alive, and in that case the lasso is thrown, while riding in hot pursuit, in such a way as to make the stone twist many times around the neck, body, or legs of the fugitive, arresting him even in full career." "Oh, Father, what a splendid contrivance! Will you try it now?" "There is the donkey, Father. Do catch the donkey." Not at all certain of my powers, I declined to practice upon a live subject, but consented to make a trial of skill by aiming at the stump of a tree at no great distance. My success surpassed my own expectations. The stump was entwined by the cord in such a way as to leave no doubt whatever as to the feasibility of the wonderful performances I described, and I was assailed by petitions from the boys, each anxious to possess a lasso of his own, without a moment's delay. As the manufacture was simple, their wishes were speedily gratified, and lasso practice became the order of the day. Fritz, who was the most active and adroit, besides having, of course, the greatest muscular strength, soon became skilled in the art. That night a change came over the weather, and early next morning I perceived that a gale of wind was getting up. From the height of our trees, I could see that the surface of the sea was in violent agitation. It was with no small satisfaction that I thought of our hard-won pinnace, safely moored in the harbor, and recollected that there was nothing to call us to the wreck for the next few days. My attention was by no means monopolized by my sons and their amusements. My wife had much to show me, demanding my approval, advice, or assistance, as the case might be. A good supply of wild pigeons and ortolans had been snared, partly cooked, and preserved in lard. Of these she showed me her small cask, well filled. Then the nests of various pairs of tame pigeons were exhibited, but her chief care was the unpromising condition of her dear little fruit trees, for having been forgotten, they were so dry and withered that unless planted without further delay, she feared we should lose them. This needful work we set about therefore at once, proposing afterwards an excursion to the calabash wood, in order to manufacture a large supply of vessels and utensils of all sorts and sizes. Every one was inclined for this expedition. Consequently, the planting of the orchard was carried on with surprising vigor, but was not completed until towards evening, and then all sorts of arrangements were made for an early start next day. My wife and Franz were to be of the party, and their equipment took some time, for we meant to make a grand family excursion attended by our domestic pets and servants. By sunrise we were all astir, and everything quickly made ready for a start. The sledge, loaded with ammunition and baskets of provisions, and drawn by the donkey, was to be used for carrying home our gourd manufactures, as well as any other prize we might fall in with. Turk, as usual, headed the procession, clad in his coat of mail. Then came the boys, with their guns and game bags. Their mother and I followed, and behind trotted Juno, not in very good spirits, poor dog, because Master Nips, who had no idea of being left alone, must needs ride on her back. On this occasion I took 2 guns with me, one loaded with shot for game, another with ball for our defenses against beasts of prey. Flamingo Marsh was quickly crossed, and the magnificent country beyond lay extended in all its beauty and fertility before our eyes. It was new to my wife and 2 of the boys, and the lovely prospect enchanted them. Here Fritz and Jack turned aside into the bush, where presently loud barking was followed by the quick report of a gun, and a large bird, which had risen from the thicket, fell heavily to the ground before us. Far from resigning itself, however, to death or captivity, it sprang to its seat, and, unable to fly, rushed away with extraordinary speed, hotly pursued by the excited dog, while Fritz ran panting in the same direction, and Juno, eager to join the chase, sprang aside so suddenly that her rider was flung unceremoniously on the sand as she darted to intercept the retreat of the active bird. This she cleverly accomplished, but its defense was maintained so fiercely as it struck out with its powerful legs and sharp claws, that neither Fritz nor the dogs could master it. I hastened to their assistance, and found Juno holding on nobly by the wing she had seized, while the bird, which proved to be a magnificent bustard, struggled and fought fiercely. Watching my opportunity, I threw a large handkerchief over it, and with difficulty succeeded in binding its legs and wings. It was borne in triumph to the rest of our party, who meantime had been reclining on the sand. "What have you got? What has Fritz shot?" cried the boys, starting up at our approach. "A bustard! Oh, that is splendid! To be sure, it is the one we missed that day. Don't you remember, Mother? Aha! Old fellow, you are done for this time," said Jack. "I think this is a hen bustard. It is the mother bird," said Ernest. "Ah, yes, poor thing," exclaimed my wife in a tone of concern. "It is most likely the same, and I know she had a brood of young birds, and now they will be left unprotected and miserable. Had we not better let her go?" "Why, my dear, kind-hearted wife, that was weeks and weeks ago. Those little birds are all strong and big by this time, and I dare say Mrs. Bustard here has forgotten all about them. Besides, she is badly wounded, and we must try to cure the hurt. If we succeed, she will be a valuable addition to our poultry yard. If we cannot, you shall roast her for dinner." Resuming our march, we next arrived at the Monkey Grove, which was the scene of the tragicomic adventure by which Fritz became the guardian of the orphan ape. While he amused us all by a lively and graphic description of the scene, Ernest was standing apart under a splendid coconut palm, gazing in fixed admiration at the grand height of the stem and its beautiful, graceful crown of leaves. The cluster of nuts beneath these evidently added interest to the spectacle, for drawing quietly near him, I heard a long-drawn sigh, and the words, "It's awfully high. I wish one would fall down." Scarcely had he uttered these words than, as if by magic, down plumped a huge nut at his feet. The boy was quite startled and sprang aside, looking timidly upwards, when, to my surprise, down came another. "Why, this is just like the fairy tale of the wishing cap," cried Ernest. "My wish is granted as soon as formed." I suspect the fairy in this instance is more anxious to pelt us and drive us away than to bestow dainty gifts upon us, said I. I think there is most likely a cross-grained old ape sitting up among those shadowy leaves and branches. We examined the nuts, thinking they were perhaps old ones and had fallen in consequence naturally, but they were not even quite ripe. Anxious to discover what was in the tree, we all surrounded it, gaping and gazing upwards with curious eyes. "Hullo! I see him!" shouted Fritz presently. "Oh, a hideous creature! What can it be? Flat, round, as big as a plate, and with a pair of horrid claws. Here he comes! He is going to creep down the tree." At this, little Franz slipped behind his mother. Ernest took a glance round to mark a place of retreat. Jack raised the butt end of his gun, and every eye was fixed on the trunk of the tree, down which a large land crab commenced a leisurely descent. As it approached within reach, Jack hit at it boldly, when it suddenly dropped the remaining distance and, opening its great claws, sidled after him with considerable rapidity, upon which he fairly turned tail and ran. We all burst into a roar of laughter, which soon made him face about, and then, to our infinite amusement, the little fellow prepared for a fresh onset. Laying down all he was carrying, pulling off his jacket and spreading it wide out in both hands, he returned to the charge, suddenly threw his garment over the creature, wrapped it well round it, and then pummeled it with all the strength of his fists. For a few minutes I could do nothing but laugh, but then running to him with my hatchet, I struck several sharp blows on his bundle, which we opened carefully, and found within the land crab perfectly dead. "Well, this is an ugly rascal," cried Jack. "If he hadn't been so hideous, I should not have dealt so severely with him. I wasn't a bit afraid. What is the creature's name?" "This is a crab, a land crab," said I, "of which there are many varieties, and this, I think, is called a coconut crab, or at least it deserves the name, for it is evidently very fond of eating these nuts, since it takes the trouble to climb the trees for them. The difficulty of getting at the kernel, too, is considerable. You showed no little presence of mind, Jack, when you thought of catching it in your jacket. In fact, it might have been more than a match for you otherwise, for some are most determined fighters, and are very swift, too. Now let us take it, as well as the nuts, to the sledge, and go on our way." Progress became difficult, for we were constantly stopped in passing through the wood by having to cut away the hanging boughs and creeping plants which interlaced them. Ernest was behind, and by called me back to see what proved to be an important discovery. From the several stalks of one of these creepers flowed clear, cold water, and I recognized the liane rouge, which is known in America and is so precious to the thirsty hunter or traveler. This is truly one of God's good gifts to man. The boys were much delighted with this curious plant. "Only fancy, Mother," said Ernest, as he showed it to her, "how cheering and refreshing to find this if one were lost and alone in a vast forest, wandering for days and days without being near a proper spring of water. But are you certain it is safe to drink this?" asked she. I assured her it was so, and advised the boys to cut enough to quench the thirst of the whole party, including our animals. This they did, only finding it necessary, as with the sugar canes, to cut air holes above the joints. After struggling onward for a short time, we emerged from the thickets into open ground and saw the calabash trees in the distance. As we drew near, their curious appearance and singular fruit caused much surprise and also amusement, for we were speedily established among the trees where, as I chose and cut down the gourds most likely to be useful, everyone engaged merrily in the work of cutting, carving, sawing, and scooping some manner of dish, bowl, cup, jar, or platter, according to his several taste or ability. We were to dine here, and after a time Fritz and Jack began to prepare a fireplace, their great ambition being to heat the stones red hot and cook the crab in a hollow gourd. Their mother, therefore, left them to their own devices, and attended to the hungry animals, unharnessing the ass to graze, and giving coconut milk to the poor little monkey, who had been obliged to travel in a covered basket for some time, lest he should be lost in the woods. The wounded bustard had been completely forgotten, and from heat and thirst was suffering greatly until her friendly care revived it, and it was tied to a tree and allowed to move about, its fierce spirit greatly tamed by adversity. The cooking operations came to a stand soon after the fire was lighted, for it appeared that we had no more water in the jars we had brought, so the boys proposed to go in search of a spring. I agreed to accompany them. Ernest also wished to join us, and as our intention was to examine merely the surrounding wood, I saw no objection to leaving their mother and Franz for a short time. Very soon after our exploration began, Ernest, who was in front, turned with a face of terror, shouting, "A wild boar! An immense wild boar, father! Do come quick!" And sure enough, I heard a loud snorting and puffing as some large animal passed hastily through the thick underwood beyond us. "After him, lads, after him!" cried I, hurrying forwards. "Call the dogs! Stand ready to fire!" And we pressed through the bushes to the spot where Ernest had seen the creature. The ground was grubbed up, and some potatoes lay about, showing that we had disturbed him at his midday meal. Ernest and Jack were more disposed to gather the roots than to follow up the chase. Fritz and I alone went after the dogs, who eagerly pushed on, and by the sounds we heard had evidently attacked the boar at no great distance. Terrific barking, snarling, and grunting guided us to the scene of action, and we beheld our mastiffs, one on each side of a large, respectable-looking pig, holding on by the great ears, while the animal, on seeing us, appeared rather to beseech our interference than to propose to offer a desperate resistance. In a moment, the truth became apparent. The captive grunter was no fierce native of the forest, but our own runaway sow. Our excitement had been wound to so high a pitch that the discovery was quite a shock, and we felt half angry with the creature who had disappointed us. Then the absurdity of the whole thing made us laugh heartily, and calling off the dogs, the old lady was released from her ignominious position. Our laughter resounding through the wood brought Ernest and Jack from their potatoes to see what was going on. "Much use you two would have been, suppose we had required help," cried Fritz, as they recognized their old friend. Well, you see," returned Jack, "Ernest and I had a sort of a kind of presentiment that this was going to be the old sow, and just look at our fine potatoes." A good deal of joking on the subject ensued, but it was interrupted by Ernest, who drew our attention to fruit resembling apples on the surrounding bushes, and on the grass beneath them. The sow was making amends for the fright and pain she had endured by munching and crunching this fruit at a great rate. Fritz feared that it might be the poisonous manchinee, against which I once warned them, but on examining it, I was induced to pronounce a more favorable opinion, and we collected a quantity in hopes that, if the monkey approved of it as well as the old sow, we might be able to enjoy a feast ourselves. All this time not a drop of water had we seen, and our own thirst increasing, we felt eager to procure some before returning to our resting place. Jack preceded us, and we made our way towards a high rock which rose above the thickets, when he suddenly startled us by a loud cry of, "A crocodile! Father! Father, a crocodile!" "Nonsense, boy. A crocodile of all things in this dry, parched forest, where we can't get so much as a mouthful of water." On advancing to where Jack stood, I perceived that his mistake was not so very silly after all, for I beheld an iguana, one of the largest of the lizard species, and a truly formidable-looking fellow. I was glad to assure Jack that the strange creature he had found was perfectly harmless, and that its flesh being esteemed a delicacy, it would be a valuable prize to carry back with us. In another moment, Fritz would have fired. But arresting his hand, "Your shot," I said, "would probably only wound the animal, and being extremely tenacious of life, it would certainly escape us. We must gain possession of the sleeping beauty by a gentler method." "You are not going to kiss it, are you, father?" asked Jack with a grin. I tried to rebuke him for his impertinence, but failing, I commenced operations. I first attached a cord and running noose to a stout stick, and holding a light switch in my other hand, I began to approach the creature with soft, slow steps, while the boys looked on with the utmost curiosity. Presently I began very softly to whistle a sweet, yet very lively air, which I continued more and more distinctly as I drew near the lizard, until, awaking, it seemed to listen with pleasure, raising its head as though better to catch the sounds, or to discover whence they came. When near enough, I began gently to stroke and tickle him with the wand, continuing to whistle the prettiest tunes I could think of, and the lizard gave signs of pleasurable contentment, stretching his limbs and moving his tail in token of enjoyment. Suddenly, availing myself of a movement of his head, I cast the noose over it, drew the cord tight, and placing my foot on the body, I was about to kill it by piercing the nostril, almost the only vulnerable part in this singular reptile, when Jack received such a slap from its tail, which it was furiously driving in all directions, as sent him rolling over like a ninepin. At the same time he opened his jaws, when the boys took fright at the row of sharp teeth, and thinking that the sooner he was dead the better, were for battering him with sticks. But I, assuring them my method would kill him more quickly and without pain, thrust my rod into his nostril, on which the blood flowed, and the lizard soon expired. The boys seemed to think me as wonderful a person as a snake charmer, and the success of my stratagem, as well as of the means by which the lizard was slain, called forth great admiration, since they never had heard of the animal, nor of the method of capturing it so commonly practiced in the West Indies. Now came the question of how we were to carry this unwieldy burden. I had a great dislike to killing any creature and leaving it useless behind me, so without more ado, I fairly took it on my back and marched off with it. As we came towards the calabash wood, we could hear the voices of the deserted mother and child calling us in anxious tones, for indeed our protracted absence alarmed them. We shouted joyously in reply, and our appearance as we issued from the woods afforded them welcome relief from their fears, although the dreadful creature on my back startled them not a little. There was so much to tell, so much to be seen, that for a time hunger and thirst were forgotten, and no one thought even of the water we had vainly gone in search of, until Master Nips, having slyly possessed himself of some of our new-found apples, was discovered munching away and enjoying them amazingly, which instantly gave the boys a strong wish to eat some also, and as the bustard likewise pecked at them without hesitation, I felt sure there could be no danger. And on tasting them, I concluded it was the fruit of the guava, a West Indian plant which we were delighted to have. Although refreshing, this fruit rather sharpened than appeased our appetites, and we were glad to eat the provisions we had brought from home, without waiting to cook anything as we had originally intended. It was, in fact, high time to move homewards, and we thought it best not to encumber ourselves with the sledge and the greater part of its load, but to leave it until the next day. The ass was laden with the iguana and the bustard, and little Franz, tired as he was, looked in vain for a spare seat on its back. Our road home lay through a majestic forest of oak trees, beneath which lay numberless acorns, some of which we gathered as we went along, and at length, before night closed in, we all reached Falconhurst in safety. When supper was ready, we were thankful to recruit our exhausted strength by eating heartily of a piece of broiled iguana with potatoes and roast acorns, which tasted like excellent chestnuts. Chapter 7. The first thing to be done on the following day was to return to the calabash wood to fetch the sledge with the dishes, bowls, and baskets we had made. Fritz alone accompanied me. I desired the other boys to remain with their mother, intending to explore beyond the chain of rocky hills, and thinking a large party undesirable on the occasion. Passing through the wood of evergreen oaks, we observed our sow feasting on the acorns, evidently not a whit the worse for the fright we had given her the previous day. In fact, she appeared more friendly disposed towards us than usual, possibly considering us as her deliverers from the jaws of the savage dogs. Many birds tenanted this grove, and were undisturbed by our movements until Fritz fired and shot a beautiful blue jay and a couple of parakeets, one a brilliant scarlet, the other green and gold. Fritz was in the act of reloading his gun when an unaccountable noise struck our ears and put us instantly on the alert, because it appeared like the dull thumping sound of a muffled drum and reminded us of the possible presence of savages. With the greatest caution we drew nearer the sound, concealing ourselves among the low bushes and thick grass and creepers until we reached an open glade, where, standing on an old prostrate log, was a beautiful bird, about the size of a cock, of a rich chestnut-brown color, finely mottled with dark brown and gray. On the shoulders were curious tufts of velvety black feathers, glossed with green. He was ruffling his wings, erecting his tail and neck feathers, strutting and wheeling about in a most strange and stately fashion. After maneuvering for some time in this manner, greatly to the edification of a party of birds resembling him, but without any ruff, who, assembled round the stump, were enjoying his performances, he spread out his tail like a fan, stiffened his wings, and began to strike with them in short, rapid beats, faster and faster, until a rumbling sound like very distant thunder was produced, and the whirring wings enveloped him as in a cloud. This was the drumming noise which had alarmed us, increased, as I imagine, by the wing strokes falling at times on the decayed and hollow stump on which the curious pantomime was acted. I was watching it with the utmost interest when a shot from behind me was fired, and in a moment the play was at an end. My over-hasty son had changed the pretty comedy into a sad and needless tragedy. The enthusiastic drummer fell dead from his perch, and the crowd of admiring companions fled in dismay. The cruel interruption of a scene so rare and remarkable annoyed me extremely, and I blamed Fritz for firing without my leave. I felt sure the bird was the ruffed grouse, and a very fine specimen. We placed it on the ass, which was patiently awaiting our return, and went on our way. The sledge was quite safe where we had left it. It was early in the day, and I resolved to explore, as I had intended, the line of cliff and rocky hills, which, at more or less distance from the seashore, extended the whole length of coast known or visible to us. I desired to discover an opening, if any existed, by which to penetrate the interior of the country, or to ascertain positively that we were walled in and isolated on this portion of the coast. Leaving Calabash Wood behind us, we advanced over ground covered with manioc, potatoes, and many plants unknown to us. Pleasant streamlets watered the fruitful soil, and the view on all sides was open and agreeable. Some bushes attracted my notice, loaded with small white berries of peculiar appearance, like wax, and very sticky when plucked. I recognized in this a plant called by botanists Myrica carifera, and with much pleasure explained to Fritz that by melting and straining these berries, we might easily succeed in making candles, and afford very great satisfaction to his mother, who did not at all approve of having to lay her work aside and retire to rest the moment the sun set. The greenish wax to be obtained would be more brittle than beeswax, but it would burn very fairly and diffuse an agreeable perfume. Having the ass with us, we lost no time in gathering berries enough to fill one of the large canvas bags he carried, and we then continued our route. Very soon we met with another natural curiosity, the curious appearance of which surprised us much. This was the abode, under one roof, of a whole colony of birds, about the size of yellowhammers, but of plain brown plumage. The nests were built in a mass round the stem and among the branches of a tree standing alone, and a kind of roof formed of grass, straws, and fibers covered them all, and sheltered the community from rain and the heat of the sun. There were numbers of openings into the irregular sides of the group of dwellings, the nests resembling different apartments in a house common to all. Twigs and small branches emerged here and there from the walls, and served as perches for the young birds, and resting places and posts of observation for all. The general appearance of the establishment reminded us of a huge bath sponge. The feathered inhabitants swarmed in and out by thousands, and we saw among them many beautiful little parrots, who seemed in many instances to contest possession of the nest with the lawful owners. Fritz, being an expert climber and exceedingly anxious to examine the nests more closely, ascended the tree, hoping to obtain one or two young birds, if any were hatched. He put his hand into several holes which were empty, but at last his intended theft and robbery met with repulse and chastisement he little expected. For reaching far back into a nest, his finger was seized and sharply bitten by a very strong beak, so that with a cry he withdrew his hand and shook it vigorously to lessen the pain. Recovering from the surprise, he again, and more resolutely, seized the unkind bird, and despite its shrieks and screams, drew it from its retreat, crammed it into his pocket, buttoned up his coat, and slid quickly to the ground, pursued by numbers of the captive's relations, who darted from the other holes and flew round the robber, screeching and pecking at him in a rage. Fritz's prize was not one of the real owners of the nests, which were those of the sociable grosbeak, but a very pretty, small, green parrot, with which he was greatly pleased, and which he at once determined to tame and teach to speak. For the present, it was carefully remanded to prison in his pocket. This curious colony of birds afforded us matter of conversation as we went on our way. Their cheerful, sociable habits, and the instinct which prompted them to unite in labor for the common good, appearing most wonderful to us. Arriving presently at a grove of tall trees with very strong, broad, thick leaves, we paused to examine them. They bore a round, fig-like fruit, full of little seeds and of a sour, harsh taste. Fritz saw some gummy resin exuding from cracks in the bark, and it reminded him of the boyish delight afforded by collecting gum from cherry trees at home, so that he must needs stop to scrape off as much as he could. He rejoined me presently, attempting to soften what he had collected in his hands. But finding it would not work like gum, he was about to fling it away, when he suddenly found that he could stretch it, and that it sprang back to its original size. "Oh, father, only look! This gum is quite elastic. Can it possibly be India rubber?" "What?" cried I. "Let me see it." "A valuable discovery that would be indeed, and I do believe you are perfectly right." "Why would it be so very valuable, father?" inquired Fritz. I have only seen it used for rubbing out pencil marks." "India rubber," I replied, "or more properly, caoutchouc, is a milky resinous juice which flows from certain trees in considerable quantities when the stem is purposely tapped. Caoutchouc can be put to many uses, and I am delighted to have it here, as we shall, I hope, be able to make it into different forms. First and foremost, I shall try to manufacture boots and shoes." Soon after making this discovery, we reached the coconut wood, and saw the bay extending before us on the great promontory we called Cape Disappointment, which hitherto had always bounded our excursions. In passing through the wood, I remarked a smaller sort of palm, which, among its grand companions, I had not previously noticed. One of these had been broken by the wind, and I saw that the pith had a peculiar mealy appearance, and I felt convinced that this was the world-renowned sago palm. In the pith I saw some fat worms or maggots, and suddenly recollected that I had heard of them before as feeding on the sago, and that in the West Indies they are eaten as a delicacy. I felt inclined to try what they tasted like, so at once kindling a fire, and placing some half-dozen, sprinkled with salt, on a little wooden spit, I set them to roast. Very soon rich fat began to drop from them, and they smelt so temptingly good that all repugnance to the idea of eating worms vanished. And putting one like a pat of butter on a baked potato, I boldly swallowed it, and liked it so much that several others followed in the same way. Fritz also summoned courage to partake of this novel food, which was a savory addition to our dinner of baked potatoes. Being once more ready to start, we found so dense a thicket in the direct route that we turned aside without attempting to penetrate it, and made our way towards the sugar brake near Cape Disappointment. This we could not pass without cutting a handsome bundle of sugar canes, and the donkey carried that, in addition to the bag of wax berries. In time we reached the sledge in Calabash Wood. The ass was unloaded, everything placed on the sledge, and our patient beast began calmly and readily to drag the burden he had hitherto borne on his back. No further adventure befell us, and we arrived in the evening at Falconhurst, where our welcome was as warm as usual. All we had to tell, listened to with the greatest interest; all we had to show, most eagerly examined; the pretty green parakeet enchanting the boys most particularly. An excellent supper was ready for us, and with thankful hearts we enjoyed it together. Then, ascending to our tree castle, and drawing up the ladder after us, we betook ourselves to the repose well earned and greatly needed after this fatiguing day. The idea of candle-making seemed to have taken the fancy of all the boys, and next morning they woke, one after the other, with the word candle on their lips. When they were thoroughly roused, they continued to talk candles. All breakfast time candles were the subject of conversation, and after breakfast they would hear of nothing else but setting to work at once and making candles. "So be it," said I. "Let us become chandlers." I spoke confidently, but to tell the truth, I had in my own mind certain misgivings as to the result of our experiment. In the first place, I knew that we lacked a very important ingredient, animal fat, which is necessary to make candles burn for any length of time with brilliancy. Besides this, I rather doubted how far my memory would recall the various operations necessary in the manufacture. Of all this, however, I said nothing, and the boys, under my direction, were soon at work. We first picked off the berries and threw them into a large, shallow iron vessel placed on the fire. The green, sweet-scented wax was rapidly melted, rising to the surface of the juice yielded by the berries. This we skimmed off and placed in a separate pot by the fire, ready for use, repeating the operation several times until we had collected sufficient liquid wax for our purpose. I then took the wicks my wife had prepared and dipped them one after the other into the wax, handing them as I did so to Fritz, who hung them up on a bush to dry. The coating they thus obtained was not very thick, but by repeating the operation several times, they at length assumed very fair proportions and became real, sturdy candles. Our wax being at an end, we hung these in a cool, shady place to harden, and that same night we sat up like civilized beings 3 whole hours after sunset, and Falconhurst was, for the first time, brilliantly illuminated. We were all delighted with the success of our experiment. "You are indeed clever," said my wife. "I only wish that with your ingenuity you would show me how to make butter. Day after day I have the annoyance of seeing a large supply of good cream go bad under my very eyes, simply because I have no use to which to put it. Invent a plan, please do." "I think that perhaps I can help you," I replied after a little consideration. "Not that I can claim the honor of the invention of my plan. That is due to the Hottentots. I will see what I can do. Jack, bring me one of our gourd bottles." I took the gourd, one of those I had previously prepared, with a small hole at one end and well hollowed out and cleaned. This I partially filled with cream, and then corked up the hole tightly. "Here, boys," said I, "you can continue the operation while I turn carpenter and make a cart to take the place of our sledge." I gave them their directions, and then set about my own work. They fixed 4 posts in the ground, and to them fastened a square piece of sailcloth by 4 cords attached to the corners. In this cradle they placed the gourd of cream, and each taking a side, rolled it backwards and forwards continuously for half an hour. "Now," I cried, looking up from my work, "open the gourd and take the contents to your mother with my compliments." They did so, and my good wife's eyes were delighted with the sight of a large lump of capital, fresh butter. With my son's assistance, the cart was in time completed. A clumsy vehicle it was, but strong enough for any purpose to which we might put it, and as it proved, of immense use to us in collecting the harvest. We then turned our attention to our fruit trees, which we had planted in a plot, ready for transplanting.
This book is continued on Disc 5.